From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there and welcome to Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. I am Ken Davis. Well, this was it. This was the week when the Chicago mayor's race started to get real. 12,500 legitimate, unique signatures had to be on file by Monday evening to qualify. And as we all know, maybe another 25,000 or so just as an insurance policy against signatures that don't stand up to challenges. Well, it's going to be a month or more before we finally know up or down which candidates are eligible to really be on the ballot. But our guest today, Lori Lightfoot, has been something of a regular on our show. And today she makes her first appearance as an official mayoral candidate. I'm very happy about that. Lori Lightfoot is an attorney who's served as chief administrator of the Office of Professional Services at the Police Department, chief of staff and general counsel for the city's Office of Emergency Management and Communications, first deputy of the Chicago Department of Procurement Services, and on and on and on. But she's probably best known as the chair of the PATF, the Police Accountability Task Force, which we've talked about with her so often here, a position to which Mayor Emanuel appointed her, and in which capacity she led the writing of a searing report on the shortcomings of policing in Chicago. She was also, for several years, chair of the Chicago Police Board. And Lori Lightfoot, it is a great honor to have you back here.
It's my great pleasure.
At the table. Thank you for doing this. I know how busy you are. And I guess before we do anything else, we should explain this this thing of yours.
Oh yeah, this thing that I'm trying to hide from view. Yeah. I was at an event a few weeks back and tried to help a toddler down a set of very steep stairs that he was afraid of, and rightfully so. And the next thing I know, I was tumbling down the stairs. So both he and I were better off if we hadn't tried to traverse the stairs, but I'm definitely on the mend.
You are on the mend, and hopefully somewhat pain-free, I hope.
Oh, pain-free at this point, yes.
Okay, good. Well, we're glad about that. So the real question is now, do you have enough signatures?
Oh yeah. Look.
Oh, listen to you. How confident?
No, I feel very confident about it. You know, having gone through ballot initiatives previously, I knew that in thinking about running for mayor, I needed to make sure I did a couple of things early on. Hire a really good election lawyer, which I did, and make sure that I hired somebody who had a lot of expertise and bandwidth in putting together petition drives, and that's precisely what we did. we were confident from the very beginning that we were evaluating our petitions that were coming in real time to make sure that we were getting a high enough rate, meaning that the people who signed up for us were actually registered to vote, that their addresses were consistent with what was in the Board of Elections archive. So I feel very, very confident about where we are. So,
I mean, the confidence then also probably comes from the knowledge that you feel that you got a breadth of signatures.
Yeah, we got signatures from all 50 wards.
Oh, did you?
A wide range. We had, in addition to some paid staff, we had over 100 volunteers over the course of time. So this was something that we took very, very seriously. We devoted a significant amount of time and resources to make sure that we got it right. Of course, when we started, we thought our principal nemesis was going to be Rahm Emanuel with his tens of millions of dollars. But even after he jumped out, we knew that you can do everything else, but if you don't get on the ballot, it's off or not. Yeah. So we wanted to make sure that we got this completely right, and I feel very confident about that.
So when I walk into my Chicago precinct on February 26th, your name's going to be on that ballot.
Without a doubt.
No doubt about it.
No doubt about it. I have no concerns about that. Look, I can't stop people from challenging, but they're going to be wasting their money and resources because our petitions are rock solid.
And of course, I don't want to put you in the position of commenting on other people's, but we have seen some surprising, what appear to be weaknesses in other campaigns.
Yeah, I mean, you have to take a little bit, of course, with a grain of salt. A lot of this is the showmanship. The fact of the matter is that many of the ones that have become in the news are ones that were filed just this week. And so it's only been a couple of days, and other campaigns certainly want to create a negative buzz against the opposition. Look, it'll all sort itself out in the wash. There's still going to be a number of people that are on the ballot. I would say certainly at least 10, if not north of 10.
Really? You think more than 10?
Yeah, well, there are 21 people that filed. And in order to actually do a thorough challenge in the very tiny window of time, challenges have to be filed by Monday, December 3rd, which is a week after the last filing date. That takes a lot of time, a lot of resources, so you've got to be committed to building a team and an infrastructure to be able to look at these scanned PDFs, which, and then, you know, spread them all out, see if there's any anomalies or irregularities. That takes a lot of time, and if you're looking at doing more than one, I do think that there will still remain a number of people on the ballot. The real gating was getting the signatures in the first place. But look, I think some people are clearly not going to be able to make the cut.
Of course, the big focus of attention is Susana Mendoza. She didn't have very much time to get her, well, apparently, to get her petitions together. And hers do seem to be, there's a lot of speculation that she hasn't got enough to make it. I don't know if you want to add to this speculation.
Look, there's a particular campaign that's obviously been feeding stuff to news media about the quality of Mendoza's petitions. You know, I've seen them. You know, we'll take a look, as we're going to take a look at everybody's. But as I said, I think only time will tell whether there's truth or whether there's just an attempt on the part of some nefarious tricksters to dirty up someone that they clearly fear.
Which is all part of the game that's being played this month of madness.
Well, but it begs the question, right, of whether or not this is a game that should be played.
Well, yeah.
It's an absurdity that you have to have 2.5 times the number of valid signatures to get on the ballot for mayor than you do to be the governor of the whole state. 5,000 for governor, 12,500 for mayor. It's absurd.
But in reality, 36,000.
Exactly. And it's an absurdity that as a voter, I can only sign one petition, not multiple petitions. So there's a lot of things about this broken relic of the machine-style politics that absolutely must and should be changed. But right now, we all play the cards that we're dealt. And
That's right.
As I said, I think we're in good shape.
Which even goes back to the whole notion of us having to tromp around in the ice and snow in January and February. I mean, that's all part of it too, right? Why?
Why are we having an election 1 month earlier than 4 years ago at the end of February, the coldest month? It's all about incumbency protection.
Well, that was for Barack Obama, wasn't it? I think, didn't they move it so that it would be easier to vote for Barack Obama or something? Who cares? Anyway, all right, we got a lot to talk about. However, as we're sitting down at the table today, our phones are all jumping up and down on the table because they're putting up brown paper over the glass windows of Ed Burke's office in City Hall today. I can't help but want to ask you about this, not so much in terms of your mayoral campaign or anything, but just because you have such a breadth and depth of knowledge as far as these things go. What do you think is happening?
Well, look, this is obviously a serious matter that the FBI is executing a search warrant in the City Hall offices and also, as I understand it, at his ward offices. That's not something that's done on a notion. Look, I'm no fan of Ed Burke, and I've been very outspoken about that. And frankly, as the first candidate to release a good government policy, one of the first things that I said as a part of that policy is that we've got to stop elected officials from monetizing their positions, and I absolutely had Ed Burke in mind. But as for today's events, we don't know specifically. And, you know, again, we could speculate till the cows come home, and Ed Burke obviously has a broad jurisdiction. He's been given, I think inappropriately so, a wide berth to handle workers' comp cases and other things without really any meaningful check or oversight. But it would be purely speculation and frankly unfair for us to dig into, well, what is it that the feds are actually looking for?
I wasn't asking, I'm sorry.
But I can tell you about the process.
Yeah,
Look,
I was going to say, it's not necessarily to speculate about what might happen, but the process is so detailed and complicated that when that moment happens, when it flashes into the public view, a lot has already happened to make that moment
So we
happen.
call that in law enforcement, that's the moment that something goes overt.
Okay.
But there's a whole covert process, meaning a grand jury investigation that likely preceded the issuance and approval by a federal magistrate of the search warrants on a politician's offices. That's a big deal. That means that whoever's handling it here in the U.S. Attorney's offices and the FBI had to get approval from what we call Main Justice, the Justice Department in Washington, D.C., in order to get authorization to go into a politician's office, particularly an elected official who's also a lawyer. There's a lot of hoops that have to be jumped through, and you have to not, it's more than just establishing that there's probable cause and that evidence, probable cause that a crime was committed, and that evidence of that crime would be found in these particular locations. Given his status as an elected official and a lawyer, there are a lot of other hoops that the prosecutors and the FBI would have to jump through to satisfy the internal requirements and rules of the Department of Justice. And then, after getting that approval, you'd have to take that search warrant and the accompanying affidavit to a federal magistrate, and that magistrate then would also have to go through line by line and making sure that in fact a federal crime has been committed, that there's evidence of that, and that there's a nexus between the allegations of a federal crime having been committed and that there's actual evidence in those locales to be able to support the allegation of a federal crime being committed. So this is not
that's all been done.
That's all presumably been done and vetted before the agents went in and executed the search warrant, both in City Hall and in his ward office.
Wow. And okay, a mini speculation. What kinds of things would they be looking for?
Well, look, they're going to clearly look at.
Typically.
They're going to look at paper. They're going to look. I'm sure that they would be taking computer hard drives or maybe scanning them and imaging them on the spot. If there are witnesses there, they're going to be isolating them and interviewing them on the spot as well. So there's a lot that can happen in the course of executing a search warrant, but the warrant itself would spell out the specific items of evidence that they are authorized to obtain. And if something new comes up that they weren't anticipating that's on site, they'd frankly have to call up and get an amendment to the search warrant to be able to take those additional items. So again, you're probably looking at emails, other electronic data that's going to exist in computers, and then obviously if there's a lot of paper related to, again, whatever the particular issue is.
Ed Burke, he's been doing this for 50 years, so there could be a lot of filing cabinets, I bet, somewhere.
There could be.
There could be. Okay. Well, all right, enough of this. We called you here today to ask you about the Lightfoot administration, and that's what we should be doing. But kind of, my mind just twisted a little bit because I remember in the last few days that you've been speaking, I would say eloquently, about this whole Byzantine notion of aldermanic prerogative. Yes. And I think this kind of ties into what we're talking about here. We've talked about it a lot on this show. Maya Dugmasova from The Reader has written about it, and a number of other reporters. But specifically this idea that an alderman can hold something up in his or her ward because he or she doesn't like it and doesn't want it, and then all the other aldermen will go along with it. It's not written down on paper anywhere. It's just a tradition. You think it's a bad idea?
I think it's a bad idea, particularly as it manifests itself in a couple of different areas. I've been speaking about it in particular because it's a real problem with respect to making sure that we have affordable housing units, particularly to accommodate families in lots of different neighborhoods across the city. We have a few, and a very small few, of aldermen who are really using, frankly, aldermanic prerogative to push developers to make sure that they're actually building affordable units. Walter Burnett is one who comes to mind. But the vast majority of aldermen really fight against it and are subject to the kind of NIMBY, not in my backyard, uprisings that happen from time to time. One of the ones that The Reader has covered, I think, extensively is what happened in John Arena's ward, where he wanted initially 100 unit and then I think now has gotten it down to 75 unit, very modest facility to help accommodate seniors and veterans, and you would think that he was trying to resurrect some of the old notorious housing project towers in his neighborhood. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got Napolitano, who initially said yes and then vetoed a project that had affordable housing units in it that was intended to accommodate workers who have jobs at O'Hare.
And it's next to the Blue Line.
And it's right next to the Blue Line. Right. And rather than having them have to travel great distances to get to their jobs, having something that's closely situated to O'Hare that really would accommodate those workers. So what we've seen, though, is over the last 15 years in particular, is a dearth of construction of affordable housing units, in part because the alderman says no. And that veto has been unilateral and unchecked, and that's a problem if we want to take on these bigger issues that really are important to the larger interests of the city and aren't specifically unique to a particular ward.
And it's important to say that this is not just a case of racially sensitive areas, let's say. This is happening all over the city. Joe Ferguson released a report that between 2000 and 2015, over that 15-year period, not a single affordable housing unit was built in 22 of our 77 neighborhoods.
That's right. That's right. And frankly...
And that would be because aldermen didn't want them.
They didn't want them. And in fact, I'll refer your viewers to our website. If you look at our housing policy, the very last page is a heat map that visually plays out that very statistic that was found in the IG's report. It's a problem. But stepping back from that, and particularly in light of what's happened today regarding Alderman Burke, the other danger with aldermanic privilege and prerogative is that even though it's an unwritten, it's a known reality. And so it has the potential to breed corruption. So what it means is if you're a developer or you're a business person or you're somebody that wants to just do business in the ward, you've got to go and kiss the ring of the alderman. And then if you have corruption, as we've seen over the years, and I was a prosecutor in the Silver Shovel case, which is exactly every single one of those prosecutions related to this issue of aldermen using their power and their clout to extract bribes from people that wanted to do business in the ward, and how easy that slippery slope gets traversed because of this power that they have. And it's really unchecked, and that's a real problem.
Have you heard the City, the podcast, The City, Robin Amers thing she did?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it was done for USA Today, and it's an amazing. It's like 14 or 8 sessions about the building of the mountain and then the fact that it couldn't get dismantled because of you know all
Mount
that.
Henry.
Mount Henry, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You talked about a transfer tax proposal, and I know a number of people have brought that up as a way of perhaps trying to spur some affordable housing development in Chicago. But I think this brings us to the larger question, Madam Mayor, of exactly how do you get something like this going? There's plenty of developers who want to develop, one-bedroom and studio towers along the Blue Line.
Yes, of course.
But are there developers who want to develop something on?
There absolutely are, but frankly, the city hasn't really occupied the space and been a leader in this. You know, depending on who you talk to, we're about 120,000 affordable housing units down. And again, this isn't about, this is about making sure that Chicago continues to be a city that people can live in, that we don't want to become a San Francisco or Seattle, particularly with families. I live in the Logan Square neighborhood, and I've been there now almost 14 years, and I've seen the transformation of that neighborhood. For me as a property tax, or as a homeowner of means, that transformation, frankly, has helped. It's improved my property values. Obviously, we've also had an increase in our property tax assessment, but I'm able to handle that. But for a lot of my neighbors, who their home is their only asset, or a lot of my neighbors who rent, that transformation has created real hardship and displacement. That's happening all over the city, but the City of Chicago government has not been engaged and involved in a way that's appropriate. Also, frankly, we've talked to a number of different housing advocates coming at this from a lot of different perspectives, and the thing that they tell us over and over again is that it's so difficult to get the basics done, that the city is not set up to be friendly, whether it's private developers, whether it's community-based organizations. They don't get involved early enough in a transaction, in a deal, and then when they get involved, they put up a bunch of roadblocks instead of thinking from the perspective, this is mission critical to the city. We've got to really get a handle on this deficit in affordable housing units, and we've got to be figuring out ways that we can get to yes and not just throw up objections. So one of the things that's going to happen in a Lightfoot administration is all of the different city units and departments that touch this issue, whether it's building or zonings or the new housing department, their mission is going to be let's do deals that make sense, that don't give away the store, but let's get involved early, let's cut the bureaucracy, and let's try to promote the increase in development of these affordable housing units.
We had Kevin Jackson from the Rehab Network on here a couple of weeks ago, and that was his lament, is that after 30 years of doing this, there is just more bureaucracy than there was before, and that we don't seem to be able to get beyond that. And of course, I don't know exactly how it fits into all of this, but the shadow behind all of this is the CHA.
Yeah.
I mean, I just went back yesterday and just sort of jotted down Hope 6, Housing Choice Voucher Program, Moving to Work, the extension of Moving to Work to 2018, the right of return, the plan forward, all of these things that have just become part of our vernacular, that we know the CHA is doing these things. They seem to be sitting on a lot of money, but they seem to be doing less than they've ever done before. And this is a city agency, although it is obviously connected with the federal government. It is a city agency, and you, Madam Mayor, you get to appoint that board, and you get to appoint the people who run things. Can you not tell them what to do?
Of course you can. Of course you can.
Well, then why has it become so moribund? Why is it moribund?
Because you actually have to care. And you actually have to think about, again, expansively about how having housing that's affordable, not just public housing in the traditional sense, but housing that's affordable is critical to the vitality and strength of the city. We remain one of the few metropolitan areas in the country that continues to lose population, and a big part of that is because people feel like they're getting squeezed on a lot of different fronts, and housing is certainly one of them. So absolutely the CHA has a role to play. It's got to be part of kind of a master plan, comprehensive plan for thinking about housing in a very fundamentally different way, and really engaging with people who are out there in the trenches, in the neighborhoods. One of the things that I call for in my housing plan is doing an audit of the voucher program, because it makes no sense that we're sitting on all these vouchers when there's such an incredible need. But we also, frankly, look, we've got to be realistic. There's still a lot of private sector landlords who will not take those vouchers. They come up with every excuse in the book because they know that if they are upfront about it, they're going to subject themselves to legal liability. But we've got to break down those barriers so that we can stratify our neighborhoods with a lot of economic diversity and really build wealth and strength. But you can't do that if people are housing unstable. Yeah,
and of course that then takes us from housing more into other kinds of policies where we're seeing 150,000 African Americans just leaving Chicago. We're seeing almost Detroit-like neighborhoods in parts of our city.
Entirely. Well, I mean, I know Detroit really well, and there are parts of our city that don't even look like we're in the same continent, let alone the same city in the same state.
And you can look up and see downtown. You can see the whole skyline.
Like mockingly so.
Right, mocking it, exactly.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So again, is this something, and I find myself a little cynical about this at this point, is this something that a mayoral administration can actually change?
It has to. It absolutely has to. A big reason why I jumped into this race is exactly the disparities that you've identified. We have a tale of multiple cities, but one big part of it is that we are leaving generations of people behind.
Yes, we are.
I think about this story. It's come back to me many times. My father grew up in Arkansas and was dirt poor. And we struggled as a family financially my entire growing up years. But in the summer of 1969, I went down to Arkansas to meet my father's people for the first time. And it was one of these deals where, go down to the cotton field, turn left, and on the side of the road you see a couple of ramshackle houses, and that's the conditions that people live. I'd never seen that kind of poverty before in my life, even though we struggled financially. Well, I was in Inglewood back in the summer for a back-to-school march, and I was immediately transported back to that summer of 1969 by the conditions that I saw in that neighborhood. Look, there's a lot of things that are going on well in Inglewood, and Inglewood's certainly not the poorest and most economically distressed neighborhood in our city, but the fact that people are living in such abject poverty, that they're living in housing stock that frankly isn't fit for habitation in our city, with all the resources that we have is an absolute abomination. And of course, a mayor has an obligation and an ability to really do something about that.
One of the things that I think stokes fear is that Mayor Emanuel has been criticized, and rightly so, for the fact that he was kind of the, you know, the downtown mayor and all that, and that the neighborhood suffered during his time. I think that there might be a lot of people who would be hesitant to vote for someone saying the things you're saying, because they're saying, yeah, but at least that's right. At least that part's working. And if they start taking money out there and putting it out here, they're going to screw the whole thing up.
I've heard that, right? And here's here's the response. We're paying for it now. We're paying for it in the need to have additional public safety resources, more police, more arrests in our jails, in our hospitals, where people are showing up in emergency rooms because they don't have access to good quality health care and are using the emergency rooms as their primary care facility. The status quo has great cost. And the more we keep allowing our neighborhoods to be hollowed out, the disparity between the haves and the have-nots are going to grow. And for the people who stay, the financial burden is going to be profound. I think there's a moral imperative to do something about this, but even if that doesn't ring a bell for you and it doesn't prick your consciousness, you're paying for it now. And if we don't do something to reverse these trends, it's only going to get worse.
I heard you on WGN the other day with John Williams saying poverty is not cheap.
That's right.
And I think that's such an important point to make.
That's absolutely right. It's for people who say, well, this really doesn't concern me and it really doesn't bother me. It's concerning you because of your tax dollars are going to fund this dysfunction. The lack of investment that prevents people from growing wealth, prevents people from connecting up with a legitimate economy, doesn't provide for health care and mental health care and trauma care for those neighborhoods. That has a cost to it, and we are paying that every single day as taxpayers.
And we're also paying a cost, although it's very difficult to perceive it specifically. We're paying a cost every time a minority family moves out of the city of Chicago. We're screwing up the whole fabric of the city by doing that.
Well, we're seeing it manifest in a lot of different ways, right? The fact that we have so many CPS elementary and high schools that are utilized because of lack of population is a problem. That's due in part, not entirely, but that's due in part to the exodus out of our city. When we lose population, we're losing tax base, we're losing the potential that those families would have had in our city, but now they're gone. And frankly, who's benefiting from that? The suburbs where they go, Atlanta, other parts of the country. This is a problem. And if we do not get a handle on it, we are on the precipice.
Also an excellent piece just recently from the BGA about Dalton and what happened in Dalton. And it's too complicated to talk about here, but it's worth the 45-minute read to see what happens to one small place when the population switches at the same time that there is massive disinvestment. And all these people who left Chicago thinking, I'm going to finally make the dream, but they were just a little bit too late because the music stopped at the same time they were there.
That's exactly right.
And it's a horrible thing to watch. We're talking about just talking generally about poverty, but some have suggested some kind of a UBI, a universal basic income. Is that something that you would put on the table?
Look, I came out a while ago saying that I support the pilot program that has been promoted by Alderman Pawar. I think we've got to look at that. Look, I grew up in a family that struggled financially. And what we're talking about is a very modest amount of money. It's not going to displace anyone's income, but having that extra support, as happens in other parts of the country, other parts of the world, could make a huge difference in the quality of a family's life and help bridge the gap when a series of low-income jobs is just not getting it done to keep them, in their houses, keep them with decent food and so forth. So yeah, I think it's something that is an idea that we should explore as a pilot program here in the city of Chicago. And let me just add to the point we were talking about before. Look, we absolutely must do everything we can to continue to attract businesses, to really keep our central business district in particular thriving. But we should also be focused on attracting those kind of businesses into our neighborhoods. And for the businesses who, whether it's a McDonald's or a Google or whomever, we ought to be asking them as part of our dialogue about coming to Chicago to help partner with us to fill some of the needs in other places in the city. I spent a lot of my time advising CEOs and C-suite executives about issues related to their businesses. So I have a pretty good handle on what motivates them, how to entice them to come and do business in a city. The one thing that I know that they also want to do is most of them want to try to be good corporate citizens. They're investing tens of millions of dollars every single year in the communities in which they have locations. So let's focus and harness that money that's already there, it's already being spent in ways that actually can add to the common good and help uplift the quality of life in our neighborhoods.
So how do you read the Target situation with the closing of the 2 stores on the south side? I mean, we can only assume that Target, the corporation, did what it thought was the right thing. It made an investment in Chicago in a less invested in community, and it didn't work out for them.
Well, look, it's disappointing, obviously, that those 2 stores are closing. It's going to be a hardship on the people in those communities who need the resources, and particularly going to be a hardship on the workers who are going to be displaced as a result of that. But
and if I might just say, and it's also going to be just like a sore thumb sticking out that will be that will get in the way of other companies making investments, because they'll just point to that.
No, I think that's right. But a couple things, I think, from a city perspective. One, the mayor shouldn't have been reading about the fact that Target was closing in the newspapers, which seems like he was caught unawares. If you've got a company that's making an investment in an area that really desperately needs it, there ought to be an ongoing dialogue with that company to understand what the metrics are, what the economies are, or how are they doing, so that at the end of the day, if a closure happens, and you hope it doesn't, that it should be at the last resort. After a lot of dialogue and discussion, the city should have been engaged in a way that it wasn't there, and that will be something that's different in the Lightfoot administration. But also, frankly, it goes back to the point that I made before. We can't just base our economic development strategy in neighborhoods on the hope that big boxes are going to come and go.
Right.
I mean, the retail market is very tough. We know that. But we should be focusing on building up small businesses in our neighborhoods, because they hire from the neighborhoods, the wealth stays in the neighborhoods. There's a whole lot of benefits by their mere presence. They add stability. A lot of benefits that come from having a really robust small business economic development program. But that means the city has to use its power and resources to really go to financial banks and other financial lenders to lower the barriers to access to capital. But here again, we don't have a strategy that includes really building up the quality of our small businesses in the neighborhoods.
I must say that I admire the fact that you are one of those thinkers who seems to understand that everything is everything, and you just can't work on one strand, right, because every other strand is woven into it. It's
all part of the same ecosystem.
It absolutely is, and that of course brings us to I mean, we could jump right off into schools. I was at City Club yesterday. I saw Bill Daley talking about the fact that our big problem is that we've lost so much population, that we're down from 3 million to 2.7 and going and still headed downward. And he made one of his boasts that by 2030 he'll have the population back up to 3 million. I think that's a wonderful thing, and it's something that we desperately need.
Note the smirk on my face. I want to say to Bill, with due respect, where have you been? This is a guy who's got a pedigree. Obviously, he's part of a well-known family, and suddenly, because Goliath has been slayed, he and other people jump into the race. But where's he been? I have no idea what Bill Daley's positions are on a range of different issues, because he's been silent. Other than bemoaning the fact that Rahm Emanuel has cast aspersions on his brother, this is a guy who's been nowhere on any issue of the day. So it's all well and good, and the voters will be able to make their choice. But I'd like to see somebody with a proven track record standing up and talking about these issues, and frankly, with due respect to Bill, he just doesn't make the cut.
I bring it up because he was able to tie this into the schools and say that he raised some statistics that we all know, that in 2000, CPS had 435,000 students. It now has 361,000 students. It has 150,000 open seats at the moment. And again, I don't mean to make Bill Daley the straw man here, but
I'll stop beating him up.
No. I'm just saying that it just happened. It was yesterday. He was speaking yesterday, but saying that he will have the courage to completely reevaluate the schools and close lots of them because we have 150,000 empty seats, and we need to start downsizing, just like a business would.
Well, but public schools are not a business, with due respect. Look, I grew up in public schools. They weren't great public schools, but they were public schools. I went to walk to school from kindergarten through high school with my neighborhood friends. And public schools, as you well know, are more than just places where kids learn. They should be community assets.
Yep.
We should be placing a lot more emphasis on building out community schools to keep people in the neighborhoods. People are leaving for a whole host of reasons, but when they don't feel like they've got a good quality open enrollment, either elementary school or high school, in their neighborhood, people are making decisions about whether or not they can have a future in the city of Chicago. So yeah, let's close, crash and burn. We see how well that worked. We closed 50 schools. We did horrible injury to those communities. We treated parents, teachers, and other stakeholders like they were unwelcome guests. We cannot go back to that same old, same old. Yeah, if Bill Daley wants to do that, that I think underscores that he's got an idea of the future that is very much tied to a very dark and bad past that got us into a lot of the messes. And I don't mean to pick on him because frankly, I think a lot of the other people who jumped into the race after Rahm Emanuel was vanquished have very similar ties to a broken machine style form of politics that don't have a vision for the future and fundamentally do not put people first. You can't talk about closing schools like you're closing businesses and franchises when you're talking about people and you're talking about neighborhoods who need and deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, and for whom those schools may be the only asset that they have. What we've got to do is be much more transparent, engage people in those neighborhoods in a dialogue, and come together as a city and a community to help solve those problems. That's what I propose.
You can't have the conversation we were having 10 minutes ago about trying to re-energize and to jumpstart dying communities if schools are not already there and ready.
100%. If you do not, the schools have a significant role to play in the economic vitality of a neighborhood. That's where businesses look. What's the school system like? Do I have a ready, willing, and able workforce because it's been produced by the local schools? All of those things factor into this larger ecosystem of economic development and really trying to transform neighborhoods. And to just say flippantly, we're just going to close them and we're going to shut them down and I'm going to be able to make the tough choices, that's exactly the same thing that Rahm Emanuel said when he gutted 50 schools, when he closed the 4 schools in Inglewood, when he ridiculously is trying to close the National Teachers Academy that is a high-performing level 1+ neighborhood school of low-income black kids sacrificed to provide a high school to the South Loop. There's a right way and a wrong way to do everything, and we have got to do things in a different and better way so that we are respectful to people and we keep people in the city, and frankly, I think fundamentally change the relationship between the government and its people.
Is it fair to ask about Janice Jackson? Do you think Janice Jackson is doing, I don't want to say doing a good job. Is Janice Jackson the person for the job? She's certainly central casting, let's put it that way.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. Obviously, she's got a very compelling story. And from my perspective, the fact that we've had 5 different CEOs in the last 7 years is a huge part of the problem. At CPS, you can't have continuity in any policy. You can't hold people accountable when you're constantly changing the deck chairs at the top. But I think Janice Jackson needs to focus on doing her day job. You know, I just saw in the news that she's now taking on responsibility to head a transition team for the governor-elect. Maybe that's a good thing, but I want her to focus on making sure that every single day our kids are learning in a safe and clean and welcoming environment, and we got a long way to go. We know that from, frankly, the Tribune expose. We know that from the hearing that was held yesterday in City Council. We got to keep our eye on the ball of making sure that our kids are getting the best quality education that they possibly can, and all these other distractions make me concerned.
And she's also calling on moms to have more babies. That was yesterday too. So, you know, I just hate ringing this bell all the time, but I'm going to ask it one more time. Now that we know a little bit more about the role that charters have played in all of this, there are plenty of people who say that some of it was positive, but I want to know, do you think, I mean, if you could go back and go back to the beginning, would you have allowed charters to have proliferated the way they did? Well,
look, that's a kind of an impossible question to answer, right?
Because it's an unfair question.
But what I say is
I can't think of another way to ask it.
Well,
though.
I think I support a moratorium on charters, right? Charters following magnets, following selective enrollment. What we've been doing is lurching towards the next kind of shiny object, and rather than, again, focusing on what the core mission should be. We have
maybe this will solve the problem.
We have to have good quality neighborhood schools that people don't have to feel like they're taking an entrance exam to MIT to get their kids into, or that they would never send their kids to because they're under-resourced. That has got to be our focus, and we've got to figure out the best way to get there. Look, there have been some good things that have happened with charters, but I think where we are in the history of CPS and the realities of what that population, our system looks like, and what kids are being well served and what aren't, we've got to put a halt to charters for now, and we've got to get back to basics and focus on building up our neighborhood schools.
They built some nice schools, and they've done some good things, and now that they're all under the same union, I have a feeling that we're just headed to like some kind of giant merger in about 10 or 15 years.
I don't think they're quite yet. I know that CTU is doing a lot of organizing in the charters, and that there's been some progress made in that area. But fundamentally, from the 50,000-foot level, there's a lot more work that we need to do. And again, one of the things we haven't talked about is, I think, the necessity of having an elected school board.
Oh, that, yeah. And how do you go about doing that?
Well, I think what my principles are, and I come to this because my mother served on an elected school board in the town that I grew up in Ohio, and I know from that experience how important it is to really have a parent advocate at the table when big decisions are being made. So we've got to have a model that really makes sure that we've got real parents, advocates that are sitting in charge of that school board and not substituting one set of a broken system from another broken system where this school board becomes the captive of special interests. I'm looking very closely as the various pieces of legislation move through Springfield. I haven't seen one yet that I think truly captures the essence of what I'm looking at, either in terms of size, or making sure that we don't have yet another whole debacle in elections that make it unaffordable for the average person to be able to participate. I think there's ways that we can get this right, but I do think it is absolutely high time for us to have that. The fact that, for example, the current school board essentially does all of its work in executive session behind closed doors with no transparency around what questions are being asked, how they're being briefed, what the issues and nuances are, and then just comes out in public and takes a final vote. That we should change now, and it's not dependent upon an elected school board. And I think
just a mayoral order.
That's just do it in public.
Yeah.
I mean, every other board, I mean, I was on the Chicago Police Board, and obviously because of the sensitive nature of the things that we were involved in, we did most of our work behind closed doors, but we issued written opinions. We took a vote so people were accountable. The school board has to be much more accountable and transparent to the public. That's an easy fix if there was a will to do it. So I hope, Frank Clark, you're listening. Change that and do your business in public.
The everything is everything bus has now stopped at our next stop, which of course is law enforcement.
Yeah.
I made a decision, talked to David, our producer, about this beforehand, and said, I don't want to talk about anything with the police department with Lori until we're well into the show, because we've talked about all those things in the past.
Yes.
And I want people to hear that you think about a lot of other things beside that.
I do.
But first of all, just in the news right now, we're seeing this trial of the 3 police officers, and some commentators have said that in the long haul of things, this might have more impact than the Laquan McDonald trial itself.
It certainly has the potential to do that.
And why is that?
Because this is really about the systemic problems, right? And it's called lots of different ways: the code of silence, the cover-up. But the fact that you had something kick in right away in the minutes after the shooting happened that coalesced around a narrative. You know, there were a number of different officers out there. The detectives came to investigate. It would have been IPRA at the time was out there. But the fact that this narrative got coalesced and became part of the official record so quickly afterwards, I think should give all of us pause. And the fact that that the only reason that we're having this discussion is because there's a videotape that completely...
One videotape.
One videotape.
Yeah.
That's
the videotape that changed the world.
It did, and look, I always have a caveat when I talk about videotapes, because it gives you a perspective, not the total perspective. But this particular videotape really kind of told us all that we needed to know. And obviously, a jury has determined that Jason Van Dyke committed murder that night when he shot Laquan McDonald 16 times. But this is a larger issue, and the pressure, you know, there was testimony that's in the paper today of a female police officer who found out that the detective had...
Dora.
Yes, the detective had falsely reflected what she had told him. She was outraged by it. She contacted a lawyer, which I thought was interesting, and then has now come and according to her testimony, suffered a significant amount of abuse from her colleagues, calling her a rat. And frankly, the reporting of the way in which she was cross-examined by one of the defense attorneys who I have some history with is shameful, and frankly, I'm disappointed that the judge.
I watched it. I saw it last night. It was remarkable to see, and I mean, it started out with when 10 minutes into your shift, you went to Dunkin' Donuts, right? And your partner went in, and you turned your radio off so you could make a personal call, didn't you? That's the kind of police officer you are. And I don't know, but my
and
sense
making
is
it
that
look like she had no wherewithal to be able to get any. I mean, look, that was a dog whistle. We all know what that is, and it's shameful. And I'm embarrassed that the judge allowed that level of disrespect of any witness who's coming forward under difficult circumstances to give testimony. But it does speak to, I think, the need that more work has to be done. Obviously, we're waiting for the federal judge to make his determination regarding the contours of a consent decree. But there's more work that needs to be done in helping reform our police department and really rebuilding trust. And it starts with that internal legitimacy, which this trial, I think, is really emblematic of the challenges.
How would you would take office on May 17th, something like that. What would change about the consent decree in that day that you became mayor?
Well, obviously,
how would you do things
a lot of it depends on what is in the final version. But I've issued, again, on my website, lightfootforchicago.com, a very detailed 6-page, single-space critique of the consent decree. But let me give you a couple highlights. Number one, we actually have to focus on what are the hard problems within the department. The consent decree right now focuses a lot of time and attention on requiring the department to document policies and procedures. That's not the problem in Chicago. You could probably build several pyramids with all the written paperwork that consist of general orders, special orders, and directives and the like. Not the problem here. The problem is what actually happens. What's the execution? So I want to see more commitment made to changing the things that are broken and need to be fixed, so that the monitor then can evaluate whether or not the department and the city are making substantial progress towards meeting what their goals are. Substantial progress towards paperwork, that's an insult. And frankly, it's not going to get at the bigger challenges. There are a couple of other areas that I think have to be changed within the consent decree. It allows for chokeholds. That's the Eric Garner situation. We should not allow chokeholds. That should go the way of a lot of other bad police practices. There's no way that you can actually engage somebody in a chokehold who's then going to be struggling and not harm them. And the language in the consent decree says you can't use a chokehold with the intent to do X, Y, and Z. Well, no officer is going to say, oh, I choked this person and I didn't have an intent to do harm. It puts the officers in an impossible situation. We should just get rid of it. It allows for shooting into crowds. That's the Betty Jones situation. We shouldn't allow that to happen. And it says, well, you need to be mindful and take care of the circumstances. No, if you cannot shoot someone, the target of, without the worry of hitting an innocent bystander, that is not a safe circumstance in which you can shoot your weapon. The other thing that's got to change is foot pursuit. Right? We saw earlier this summer of a young man who had a gun, was fleeing the police, discarded his gun, about ready to jump over a fence, and got shot in the back by the police. Foot pursuits are extremely dangerous. We need to have a real policy now. We don't need to wait 3 years as the consent decree allows. This is a real and present danger, both for officers, the civilians that are being chased, and other bystanders. We've got to get that right.
What would you do with the gang database?
Decommission it.
Completely.
And it's actually a series of databases, but yeah.
I know, but we generally refer to it as
I think you got to decommission it. It has been used for improper purposes. There's no consistency in the way in which people's names get on. They linger for decades without getting out. It has become completely delegitimized in the eyes of the public. Obviously, there are opportunities and circumstances where the collection of intelligence is relevant and important, and I think about it in the context of, frankly, terrorist investigations. But this Chicago gang database has well past its useful life, and it needs to be decommissioned.
How would you convince rank and file police officers that you'd be a better mayor than Gary McCarthy?
Now, that's an interesting question. Well, I'll answer it this way. I think what I say to rank and file officers, many of whom I know well, is that if you want someone who is going to care about making sure that you get best-in-class training, is going to, frankly, weed the department out of people who are engaged in intentional misconduct that delegitimizes you, is going to work like heck to make sure that we've got a good and robust program to give you the opportunity to form relationships with the people in the community so that you have them on your side to be able to be successful in your mission, then I'm your candidate.
Would you be able to build any kind of relationship with the FOP?
Look, I'm not sure. I mean, they have taken such strident positions. Look, you have to have some kind of relationship, and I've been disappointed that they have not gotten involved in some of the things that I think are incredibly important to help their members. I was on a panel not too long ago with Kevin Graham, and he was deriding everything about the consent decree. I said, well, you clearly haven't read it. You don't think it's important to have an officer wellness program to deal with the trauma that your officers face? Well, if you think along those lines and you really want to do what's in the best interest of your officers, you can't constantly keep throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Find a middle ground. Find the things that you can partner on the city with and be a productive partner instead of an intransigent obstacle to making progress that ultimately is going to hurt your officers.
Can you do that?
I think it absolutely can be done. Absolutely.
You can sit down with people who are as virulently opposed to you as the FOP would be, and you can try to find something.
I've done it my whole life. Your question reminds me of the first time when I worked for the police department that I had the president of the FOP and one of his people come over to my office. They could not have been more hostile. But over time, they recognized that it was in their interest and really in the interest of their members for us to form a productive working relationship. Look, I was tough as nails. I'm the person who advocated the lie you die rule and recommended lots of officers to be terminated because they came in and they lied to us. But worked with the FOP, gave them forewarning, and told them, look, here's the line that cannot be crossed any longer. I don't care about what the history is. And we were able to make progress, I think, on some important things. But I think People respect you when you're transparent, you put your cards on the table, and you try to work towards solutions and not just be the hammer. FOP right now, the leadership, all they're doing is saying no, 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 no. Obviously that wins hearts and minds with us, I think, a small segment of their membership, but I don't think that that is in line with the vast majority of officers who are out there who come to the job for the right reason, stay on the job for the right reason, and just want to know what the rules are so they can do their job the right way.
Is Chicago any better for having had Rahm Emanuel mayor? Did he improve this city?
Well, look, there are clearly people in the city who benefited over the last 7 years. No question about it. The problem is that those benefits came at the expense of the vast majority of people whose lives have not been improved. And that's the big reason why I got involved in this race. I think that's the thing that we absolutely have to grapple with as a city. I want to keep making progress on the things that work, but I don't want to do it at the expense of so many generations of people in neighborhoods all over the city. And that's the thing that we have to change course. And we're not going to get there by electing the same old, same old. We're only going to get there with an independent leader who has a bold vision for the city that is different, that has a desire, as I do, for a different compact, a different relationship between the people and city government that truly puts people first.
We have to make this a 30 or 15-second answer, and it's a tragedy because this is an important issue. But there's been talk about a public bank in Chicago. Is that possible? Would they allow you to have one if you wanted it?
Well, look, that idea has been bandied about. I don't think it's been thoroughly vetted yet, and I don't know that, frankly, that's the solution to our problems. We've got lots of different ways in which we can invest in neighborhoods. We just got to actually do it.
Okay. All right. That sounds reasonable to me. So finally, why did Rahm walk away?
Because he was going to lose.
Just simple as that? Simple
as that. I mean, he gave a lot of other excuses, but when we started our campaign, he was in the low 30s. By the time that he left, his approval ratings were in the 20s. Doesn't matter how much money you have. When you're disliked that much, and I won't, because it's a family program, share the level of vitriol that I heard and experienced from people who wanted him gone, he had no path to victory.
So he had no constituency left?
He had some constituency left, but it wasn't enough to get him over the threshold.
It wasn't enough to get elected?
Yeah.
Huh. You're gonna go over 50%, or are you gonna have to have a runoff?
No, I think there's going to be a runoff. We're just going to have too many people on the ballot for anybody to be able to get to 50%. But I feel very confident that if I'm one of the two, I'll be taking the oath of office in May.
Even if it's Tony Preckwinkle?
Even if it's Tony Preckwinkle.
Bill Daley?
Any comer. If I'm one of the two, I will be winning. I feel very confident about that.
It's just a pleasure talking to you always. I really enjoy doing it, and I hope we get to do it again. But, you know, you'll be busy as mayor, so we probably won't be able to talk to you very often.
Well, I love coming to the show. I appreciate your preparation and the thoughtful questions, and the fact that we actually have time to get into some substance. I appreciate that.
That's the one thing Chicago Newsroom offers. We have time. So thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.
To the extent that I can say this, good luck to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Lori Lightfoot is a candidate for mayor of the city of Chicago, and her website, we'll put it up right here. What is it?
LightfootForChicago.com.
There you go, LightfootChicago.com. And we'll see you again next week. We're going to be, we got a really interesting conversation next week, but I don't have time to tell you about it. You can go here to look at any of our programs, any of our past programs in the past. That's where they are, in the past. And we'll see you next week with another program. Thanks. Bye.